Hi everyone, just a quick update. We have a baby. Well, Miles decided to come early, wanted to make sure he was here in time for Serial Killer September. Miles, what do you have to say? He's clearly very excited to be here. What do you think about today's episode? All right, such a talkative boy. He doesn't cry much, so that's fine. He's chill. All right. I don't know what I said about him in future episodes, but he's here now, and I recorded ahead. So that's it. Enjoy the episode. Also, his name is Finn, not Miles. I'm clearly very sleep deprived and confused and exhausted. But yeah, I mean, like, it's Miles Finnegan, but we're calling him Finn. I don't know why I said Miles. That's embarrassing. Anyway, everybody's happy. Everybody's healthy. We're doing great. Enjoy the episode.
Our Weird World.
Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, and it is September, which means it is the start of Serial Killer September. We are starting off with the 6th edition of our Serial Killer Sampler. So 3 stories where we're looking at Earle Nelson, Jeanne Weber, and our first story after the fancy music of Joseph Vacher. Joseph Vacher was born on November 16th, 1869, to an illiterate farming family who quickly went and sent him off to Catholic school. This was in France, by the way. He was the 15th child in an utterly impoverished family, probably because I had 15 kids. And so because of that, Joseph rarely got any attention, like at all, and decided to join the army as soon as he could. But when he didn't get promoted or get any amount of recognition that he thought he deserved, Joseph decided that life was no longer worth living and decided to kill himself by slitting his throat. Now, obviously that didn't work because otherwise he wouldn't be in this show. So obviously the suicide attempt failed. And I guess after that, he was like, all right, well, I guess I'll just have to live life. So he tried to court this woman named Louise because women are just super attractive to self-entitled, attention-seeking suicide survivors. And not surprisingly, she was not interested at all and rejected every single advancement that Joseph made on her, including a marriage proposal, which is a ballsy move, right? Because, like, look, if she's not interested in dating you, she's probably really not interested in marrying you. So, it's a process. It's a lot like marketing. You can't expect someone to buy something from you if they're not even interested in what you have to offer to begin with. So Joseph's just doing everything wrong at this point. So obviously you can see why he became a serial killer. And upon being rejected by Louise, finally, after several times, Joseph reacted very logically and shot Louise 4 times before trying to kill himself again. But here's the thing. Not only was Joseph bad at killing himself, because that didn't work for a second time, he was also bad at murder because Louise also survived being shot 4 times. And, like, Joseph, it's insane. Like, he shoots Louise 4 times, doesn't kill her. He shoots himself in the head twice, and he survives. I don't know how you do that, but, like, I'm also not going to try, right? Like, that's weird. But, like, to shoot yourself in the head once and then realize that you didn't get it done, to then shoot yourself in the head again, how disappointing must you feel when you wake up or when you're still alive, like when you realize you're still alive and you're just like, oh man, like on one hand, you could take the optimistic route and be like, oh man, I must be immortal. I can't possibly die. And then you go do some real crazy stuff. Or you could maybe take the spiritual route, be like, oh man, I must have a greater purpose in this world, which is why God won't let me die. Or you can take the realistic approach, just be like, God, I'm just bad at everything. Like, I'm unlovable. Clearly, Louise didn't want me. I'm bad at killing people on account of she's still alive after I shot her 4 times. And I'm bad at killing myself because I'm 0 for 2 on this one. So a lot going on there. One of the bullets, though, one of the bullets that Joseph implanted in his head did paralyze one side of his face. The other one was permanently lodged in his ear. But once he had made a full recovery from his own wounds, he was placed in a mental institution in Dole. And within a year, however, doctors claimed that he was completely cured from all of his mental ailments and he was set free. But Joseph, obviously, he was not cured, or else, again, this story would not be in this show. So along with the bullets that were still implanted in his brain, really screwing up his brainwaves, the horrified expressions from people seeing his scarred and paralyzed face on the street drove Joseph toward a total hatred for human society. And like it's sad in a way, but also like that's like the most French sounding thing I could ever think of, right? Like this guy, he's had a rough life, right? He was one of 15 children at least. He never got attention. He tried to kill himself twice. Like he just thinks he's already the scum of the earth. And then now, after his second suicide attempt, half of his face is paralyzed, which has left him with just this kind of permanent grimace. And then he's trying to live a normal life, and he's going out, walking along the streets in France, and just people are just walking by and like, ugh, your face, it is so disgusting. I don't know what accent that is. I can't do French, but you get it. You get it. He did, however, decide to get better at murder. And over the next 3 years, Joseph murdered at least 11 people, mostly shepherds tending their flocks in isolated fields. And each time he would stab his victims to death before disemboweling, raping, and sodomizing them. And that's a lot. When he wasn't murdering people, Joseph drifted from town to town, begging in the streets just to kind of get enough money to get enough food to stay alive. In 1897, Joseph tried to assault a woman gathering wood by herself. However, this woman fought back, eventually alerting her husband and her son, who came to her rescue and subdued Joseph and hauled him off to the police. And after a brief interrogation, Joseph then confessed to 11 murders. At his trial, Joseph claimed insanity and even offered a variety of reasons as to why he was insane, probably because of the bullets in his brain. He first claimed, though, that his insanity had been caused by a rabid dog, and then by a fraudulent doctor who had offered a cure for the rabies, which, he could probably just be honest, like that would probably be a little bit more convincing, but instead he goes, no, I got bit by a dog who had rabies, and that made me crazy, and then the doctor who tried to treat me for the rabies made me even crazier because his cure didn't work. And then, but those two didn't convince prosecutors. So then Joseph made like this weird comparison to the Joan of Arc and then claimed that he had been sent by God, and that he took the spiritual route that I mentioned earlier. He did it. He probably a little misguided, probably wasn't what God intended. God probably didn't intend for him to start murdering shepherds and then jamming his wiener in their disemboweled intestines or whatever he was doing. But at least he took a strong mental approach to that. And I gotta hand it to him for that. He finally realized like, oh, I do have a bigger purpose in this life. God wants me to do something, and it's kill more people. And, I think maybe when God's telling you to kill people, you got to question God a little bit, just a little bit. God's going to understand. I think, look, God in his omniscience does understand when you question things, because God is smart enough to know that you're not smart enough to understand God's mysterious ways. And so, combining that with God's omnibenevolence, he is loving enough and understanding enough to know when you might want to question some things. And Joseph didn't really do that. He just went for it. So obviously, prosecutors did not believe those excuses, and Joseph was sentenced to death. On October 28th, 1898, Joseph was dragged to the scaffold by the executioners and hanged. Our next story here is of Jeanne Weber, who was born in a small fishing village in western France, but moved to Paris and worked several small jobs to make a living. She married an alcoholic man in 1893, and the couple had 3 kids together. And because she was a good wife, Weber just decided to join her husband's drinking hobby and also became an alcoholic. So that's fun. At least, making a good team there. On March 2nd, 1905, Weber's sister-in-law asked her to babysit her 2 daughters. And that night, 18-month-old Georgette mysteriously died under Jean's watch. Although there were clear bruises around the child's neck, no one really seemed to care about that, because it was kind of still a time where babies just randomly died out of nowhere. Weber, 9 days later, oh, shut up, dog. 9 days later, 9 days later, Weber was asked to babysit her sister-in-law's other child, which is, I don't understand that. Even if you don't think Jeanne was at fault, you don't ask the same person to babysit your other kid. Well, not surprisingly, 2-year-old Suzanne died again under Weber's care, but the cause of death was listed as convulsions. 2 weeks later, Weber's brother, who was not concerned at all that the last 2 kids that Jeanne babysat had died, asked Weber to babysit his daughter. Guess what happened? That night, 7-year-old Germaine suffered what doctors called a choking attack, which wasn't entirely false. Germaine, she ended up surviving, but when Weber returned to babysit the next day, Germaine died. Here's what's crazy. Here's what I don't understand about that. Doctors called it a choking attack, which, fine. Germaine, look, there's one of 2 things that could have happened. One is probably what the parents thought, where, she choked on some food or something and almost died. Or maybe literally just got attacked by Jeanne, who was trying to choke her to death. Duh. And either one is not great. Jeanne's clearly a horrible babysitter. She's already 0 for 2 on babysitting kids at this point. And then her brother's like, it's probably coincidence. Come on over. She's going to be easy. And then when she almost dies on the first night, this dude is dumb enough to ask Jeanne to come back the next day and babysit her again. And then, of course, she dies. Despite red marks on her throat, the cause of death was listed as diphtheria because, honestly, doctors in the early 1900s were really just guessing when it came to how people died. Weber's own son, Marcel, even died of diphtheria, quote unquote, 4 days later, and nobody thought that any of this was weird. Just all these kids in Jeanne's family are dying, ironically, after they've spent a lot of time around her. Although it's probably really obvious to all of you listening that Jeanne had choked out 4 kids at this point, Weber's other sister-in-law brought her 10-year-old son over for her to babysit while she and another woman went out shopping. When they returned earlier than expected, they were absolutely shocked to walk in on Weber standing over the son, choking him out. Which is, that's funny. That is so funny to me. Weber was promptly hauled off to jail and charged with 8 murders, including 2 other children that she had cared for, and her own 3 children who had already died. That's kind of plot twist. Yeah, I just mentioned Marcel, who had died. She had 2 others that had died, and her family thinks that she's a good babysitter. Listen, my wife spent most of her 20s and probably most of her teens babysitting kids. Guess what? None of them died under her watch. All right. But here's the thing. You know what? Here's the thing. Even if one of them had died, guess who's not babysitting anymore ever again? Her. Because she's going to be done. Like, she's a good enough person that she would just be like, yep, you know what? It's probably not for me. I'm going to need a lifetime of therapy to get over that, and still won't work. But I'm going to try a different career. But no, Jeanne Weber, on the other hand, things are so bleak and despondent in early 1900s France that her entire family, like she's the only babysitter in that entire family. And even though kids are dying left and right, everyone's just like, she is the best that we have. And they just keep sending her to their kids. And she's just like, yes. And she's just choking them out. And then she gets caught, shockingly. Well, thanks to basically hiring the Johnny Cochran of early 20th century France, Weber was actually acquitted of all charges because the jury refused to believe this grieving mother whose 3 children of her own had apparently just randomly died. They could not believe that she would then go out and murder 5 more kids in her own extended family. So she gets off completely. 2 years later, a doctor was then summoned to a peasant's home, and when he arrived, he was greeted by the babysitter, Madame Moulinet, who then led the doctor to the bed of a 9-year-old boy who was dead, and the cause of death was listed as convulsions. However, people quickly found out that Madame Moulinet was actually Jeanne Weber, and the case was reopened. She then rehired French Johnny Cochran and was acquitted again because the second autopsy of this boy somehow listed the cause of death as typhoid fever. From there, she is now, like 9 for 9 on murder, 2 for 2 on getting off, getting away with it. From there, Weber assumed another new identity and started bouncing from town to town around France, actually working in children's hospitals and orphanages. 1 week after starting work at a children's home in Ogreville, Weber was caught strangling another child, but instead of being arrested for this, she was just fired. So she then moved back to Paris and became a prostitute, found a common law husband, and then took up residence at an inn in the town of Commercy. Not long after she and her new husband moved into the inn, Weber was caught strangling another child. Because, look, honestly, probably pretty addicting. Kids can be pretty annoying, right? But on this occasion, she was when she got caught strangling this child, she was so focused on trying to murder this child that the child's father, who came in and caught her, had to punch her in the face 3 times before she released the grip on the child's neck. This time, she was sent to trial for murder, but was declared insane and was committed to an asylum in Maraville. And then 10 years later, she quite appropriately actually strangled herself to death. Our final story did not take place in France this time. But Earle Nelson, who was born on May 12th, 1897 in San Francisco, when he was 2 years old, both of his parents died of syphilis, which is crazy. And then Earle was sent to live with his grandmother. Well, when he was 10 years old, he was riding his bike in San Francisco and collided with a streetcar and was actually put in a coma for 6 days. And when he finally woke up, his attitude and just his overall mental health were completely different. Earle was basically considered a psychotic prodigy by doctors, which is not a label any child should have, much less any person. Earle would talk to invisible people. He would randomly quote Bible verses completely out of context, and he enjoyed watching female family members undress. And that is a trifecta of crazy that should just earn you a lifetime of solitary confinement in a mental institution. You're talking to invisible people. Cool. You're schizophrenic, right? You're randomly quoting Bible verses. So you got the religious psychotic thing going on. And then you enjoy watching female family members undress. So you're also just a mega pervert. Nothing good is going to come out of this, right? So by the time he was a teenager, Earle was a regular visitor to the Barbary Coast, which is San Francisco's red light district. Although he contracted an STD, it didn't stop him from basically growing into this insanely strong person who made a living by entertaining family and friends with incredible feats of strength, including lifting heavy items with his teeth. So, like, just this dude already all over the place, right? Super psychotic, but then he also just genetically is very strong, very, very strong. And so he becomes like this sideshow, this personal one-man sideshow, and just starts lifting, like basically like attaching things to like a rope and then just biting the rope and lifting it up. And so just crazy stuff. Well, after spending 2 years in San Quentin State Prison for breaking into a cabin that he thought was abandoned, Earle joined the military, but then deserted after only being there 6 weeks. Apparently, Earle thought that this whole process of going AWOL from the military was so fun that he re-enlisted in the army under various names on several occasions and then deserted his post after a few weeks, which that's funny to me. In 1918, however, he was finally caught and the Navy committed him to a mental hospital. Now, while in the hospital, Earle told his nurses about his hallucinations and hearing voices that kept telling him to kill himself. And honestly, probably should have listened to those. Look, at that, some of you, I felt that in the past, that some of you puckered on that one. And look, here's the thing. I know that's a harsh, very cold thing to say, but I don't know. We've seen it before. Some people should have just killed themselves before things got way out of hand. And Earle is one of those cases. Not everything is unicorns and rainbows. All right. Like, the world can be a scary place sometimes. It's just real life. And I get it. It sucks. It's not everyone, as much as we want to, not everyone's going to make it. Not everyone's going to make it to the top. Earle was one of them. All right. It's just the way it goes. So unpucker that butthole and let's finish the story. He fainted on several occasions at the hospital and complained of having severe headaches. However, he did escape from this mental institution on 3 different occasions before he was actually discharged from the Navy. And instead of transferring him to a civilian institution, the hospital just closed his file and said his condition had improved enough to be let out into the public, which was not true at all. Basically, like, so the Navy discharged him, right? And because he was at basically a military Navy hospital, like a Navy mental institution, once he was out of the military, the hospital should have just transferred him to a state-run institution, but instead they're just like, meh, he's probably fine. And then they let him out. Earle quickly found work as a janitor and married 60-year-old Mary Martin. However, that marriage lasted only 6 months because of Earle's weird behaviors, which included, quote, bizarre sexual demands and odd bathing rituals, such as pouring glasses of water on his toes. and like, here's the thing. He's already married someone probably twice his age, roughly at this point, right? Like around this time, Earle's probably around 30. He marries someone twice his age and she's weirded out by him. They don't specify what the bizarre sexual demands were. I really wish I knew because, oh God, because when you marry someone who age-wise could have been your parent, like you open up a whole new level of weird sexual taboos that you can get into. And so, oh God, I really wish I knew. Anyway, after escaping 2 more times from another mental institution, Earle did not decide to fix himself. He decided to get even weirder. On February 20th, 1926, Earle approached 60-year-old Clara Newman and asked about staying in one of the apartments that she was renting out. And then once she let him inside, Earle then strangled her to death, raped her, and tossed her body in one of the vacant units. Over the next few months, Earle then just started strangling and raping older women in the San Francisco area, with the youngest victim being just 52 years old. This is one of those rare cases of a serial killer just going after old people. Like, there's not a ton of them. Serial killers mostly go after like younger women, really just like young adults. Like, your 20s are like, a lot of people say like, just enjoy your 20s, man. Like, your 20s are like the highest chance of you getting murdered by a serial killer. I think that's just like, I don't have hard data to prove that. I've just been like, I've, studied probably close to 250 different serial killers. And that's a common theme, is like most victims in their 20s, I think, well over 50%. But sometimes you get like I know of like 3 or 4 different cases of people who just murder old ladies for like, I don't know why. Like, why are you going to murder old people? Like, they're like at the end anyway. They've only got a couple years left. Like, just let them have it. Why kill them now? Like, that's not even like a quality murder, right? You're killing someone who's already done probably everything they're going to do in life. But this is Earle. And so that fall in 1926, he moved up to Portland, Oregon, where he murdered 3 more women. He then bounced back and forth between Portland and San Francisco for a couple of more months, attacking and murdering more old women before he left the West Coast entirely and started hitchhiking east. So starting on December 23rd, 1926, people started showing up dead in Iowa, Missouri, Philadelphia, New York, Michigan, and Illinois. Each victim was a woman, and they had all been strangled and raped. And then sometime in the summer of 1927, Earle crossed over into Canada because it used to be really easy for a murderer to just go wherever he wanted. And so in June of 1927, 2 women were killed in Winnipeg. And then the day after the second murder, a local jeweler unknowingly purchased the victim's wedding ring from Earle because, now he's stealing personal affects to just try to, and he's pawning them off, obviously, to make some money so he can keep traveling or whatever. When Canadian police came looking for any of the victim's property, the jeweler, as well as a nearby clothing store owner and barber, identified Earle to the police. On June 12th, police entered a boarding house where Earle had recently stayed. And while they're there looking for him, they found the naked, decomposing corpse of one of his victims stuffed under the bed. They quickly launched a manhunt for Earle, and figuring he had actually already fled back to the United States, sent descriptions to every single police station and post office in the United States. And look, I mean, this is 1927, and not nearly as many post offices and police stations as there are today, but there's still a ton, like America's still a pretty big country at this point, stretching from coast to coast. Dog, I need you to find a place and not have a crisis right next to me. Can you go to bed? Thank you. Everything about this dog. Anyway, where were we? So yeah, the Canadian police send the descriptions of Earle Nelson to every single police station, every single post office in the United States. And 4 days later, police actually in Killarney, Manitoba, arrested a man 12 miles from the border who I actually identified himself as Virgil Wilson, but looked a lot like Earle Nelson. The man, however, acted so calmly and cooperated with police so well that they eventually thought that they had the wrong guy. However, just to be safe, they placed him in jail overnight and were shocked to discover that this man, who really was Earle Nelson, had escaped. But so, in an attempt to get out of Canada, Earle hopped on a train. However, that train was full of Winnipeg police officers, which has got to be like the worst timing and coincidence of all time. And so he was rearrested 12 hours after his escape. Although Earle continued to claim that he was actually Virgil Wilson, fingerprints from San Francisco confirmed his real identity. And at that point, Earle confessed. And what's weird, What's weird is like police are like, all right, why did you kill all these people? And then Earle was like, well, I only do my lady killings on Saturday nights, as if like that's the most appropriate time to do it, as if his schedule is so packed wandering around the country that he only has time to do it on Saturday nights. I don't know. But then he turned around and he's like, no, actually, I'm innocent. I haven't really done anything. I was just kidding. Anyway, his trial began in Winnipeg on November 1st and lasted for 4 days. After 40 minutes of deliberation, Earle was sentenced to death for just the murders that he'd committed in Canada. And Canada was actually pretty pissed off about the whole thing. They didn't even bother extraditing him back to the United States to put him on trial for the other murders. After 40 minutes of deliberation, Earle was sentenced to death. And despite several appeals on the grounds that he was clearly an insane person, Canadians showed a rare lack of sympathy and hanged Earle on January 13th, 1928. In all, he is believed to have killed upwards of 29 people. So between obviously United States and Canada, but Canada got to him and killed him. Didn't let Americans kill him, which is interesting. But that is the end of today's stories. Oh, all right. Serial killer sampler number 6 in the books, as well as the first week of Serial Killer September. So let us quickly recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number 1, French people don't like people with horribly disfigured faces. No, but also, like, listen, if you don't get the attention that you think you need, don't get that attention by killing people. That's just not the way to go about doing it, right? Number 2, mostly ladies, but fellas, if you're in this game too, if your babysitter, I stuttered so bad there. But if your babysitter has even just one instance of a kid dying under their watch, maybe don't hire them. Maybe find a different one. There's a ton of babysitters out there. Stop going with the one that keeps murdering kids, probably. And then number 3, Earle Nelson. Listen, he was a clear crazy person. And if a mental hospital is just like, meh, they're fine. Probably not fine. Probably should keep them locked up, but that's just me. Next week on Our Weird World, Serial Killer September continues on 9/11. So how appropriate on 9/11 that we look at a famous New York City serial killer. I don't know. I'm sorry. That's just the connection that I made. Some people would think that that's in poor taste, but that's honestly, to me, that's just good timing. So we are going to look at the story of the son of Sam, probably New York City's most famous serial killer, I think, just in terms of how terrorized the city was. He didn't kill a ton of people, but really famous serial killer story. A lot of people know the name Son of Sam, but we're going to look at the actual story next week. But other than that, that's going to do it here for the first week of Serial Killer September. Thank you all for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends and keep it weird. I ain't rich, but I damn sure want to be. Working like a dog all day ain't working for me. I wish I had a rich uncle that kicked the bucket and I was sitting on a pile like Warren Buffett. They call me redneck, white trash and blue collar, but I could change all that if I had a couple $1 million. I keep hearing that money is the root of all evil and you can't fit a camel through the eye of a needle. I'm sure that's probably true, but it still sounds pretty cute, 'cause it could buy me a boat It could buy me a truck to pull it. It could buy me a Yeti 110 iced down with some silver bullets. Yeah, and I know what they say, money can't buy everything. Well, maybe so, but it could buy me a boat.